As the founder of Playboy Magazine, Hugh Hefner was one of the icons of the sexual revolution in the 1960s. Opinions about Hefner are very polarized. You either love and admire the man, or you completely disapprove of the multi-million-dollar empire that he created. But no matter how you feel about Hugh Hefner, there is no arguing that he was truly a genius when it came to business and a one-of-a-kind publisher, writer, and entrepreneur. Hugh Marston Hefner was born in Chicago in 1926. He grew up in the middle of Prohibition, and his parents were conservative Methodists. His mother was a teacher, and his father was an accountant. During the Great Depression, his father was under a lot of pressure to work as hard as he possibly could in order to keep his job. He would leave the house before Hugh and his brother Keith even woke up for school, and he worked late into the night. He was a very timid and a shy little boy. He preferred to read comic books and watch movies. Most of the Hollywood starlets in the 1920s and 30s just so happened to be buxom blonde girls with an hourglass figure, and he grew up escaping into a fantasy world of romance and adventure, wishing that he could live inside these movies. In elementary school, Hugh did not talk very much, and he didn't seem to be paying attention to class. He spent most of his time drawing in his notebooks with his mind up in the clouds. He was unresponsive to his teacher's questions as well, so they thought that he might have some sort of learning disability. His mother took him to a child psychologist, and it turned out that he had an IQ of 152, which makes him a genius. The reality was that he was simply bored with what he was learning in class. When Hugh started going to high school, he had his heart broken when a girl he had a crush on started dating another boy. At this point, he was still shy and had trouble communicating, but the perceived rejection from this girl was a wake-up call. From that moment on, he realized that he needed to reinvent himself if he ever wanted to get a girlfriend. He asked his friends to start calling him Hef instead of Hugh, and he began to wear nicer clothes, cologne, and style his hair. Underneath all of these outward improvements, however, he was still that hardcore film nerd. Hugh wrote plays for the theatre department, and he filmed his own horror movies with a home video camera with his friends. He worked on the school newspaper and drew comic books in his spare time. When he was 15, he created his own zine that he had fully illustrated, and he called it Shudder. Here, he wrote articles about horror movies. He met up with a group of friends after school called the Shudder Club, where they got together to watch films and talk about them. It was at this point that he finally came out of his shell, and he was popular enough to be elected student body president. From 1944 to 1946, Hugh Hefner served in the US Army. He used his talents in writing to work for the military's newspaper. Since he did not have a combat position, he lived out the adventures in his mind by drawing comic books about fantasy missions, like one where he and a group of his friends were breaking prisoners out of a Nazi concentration camp. During World War II, illustrations and photos of pin-up girls were extremely popular in order to boost soldiers' morale. There were even paintings of Miss America on the sides of airplane bombers. Instead of staring at scantily clad strangers in his bunk, Hugh Hefner gazed at photos and letters from his fiancée, Mildred Williams. He was very much in love with her, and they planned to get married when the war was over. After being discharged from the army, Hugh Hefner went to the University of Illinois and double majored in psychology and creative writing. He excelled in school, and he was able to earn his bachelor's degree in just 2.5 years. He also wrote for the college newspaper and magazine. He was eager to marry Mildred after graduation, but the idea that he was getting to live out the plot of a Hollywood romance, well, it came crashing down. Before the wedding, Mildred confessed that she had had an affair when he was away in the army. Hugh forgave her, though, and he lost his virginity on his wedding night. They went on to have 2 children together, Christy and David. Hugh was very much in love with Mildred, and even though it broke his heart, he believed in the old traditional way of doing things. During an interview with the New York Times, Hefner explained how he felt on his wedding day. "The magic was gone from the very beginning. How would it have turned out without the affair? Was I well suited for marriage? I didn't know, but I was truly crushed." After serving in the army and graduating from college, Hugh Hefner got a job at Esquire magazine making $60 a week. With modern-day inflation, that's about $645 a week. After working there for several years, Hefner knew that he was good at his job, so he asked his boss for a $5 a week raise. This doesn't sound like a lot to ask, but they still said no. At this point, he was starting to have a bit of a quarter-life crisis. Up until that point, he had followed all of the rules of living the so-called American dream, but he was unhappy with his job and he was in an unfaithful marriage. He decided that he truly had nothing left to lose, so he quit his job and worked on starting his own magazine. Hugh Hefner knew from being in the army that men loved looking at pictures of pin-up girls. When they came home from the war, many men did not have access to it anymore because it was illegal to send anything that was considered pornographic in the mail. At that time, men's magazines were mostly about hunting, fishing, camping, and cars. Hefner saw this as a golden opportunity to start his own publication. The only issue was that he was completely broke. He borrowed $1,000 from his mother, mortgaged out his furniture to the bank for $600, and convinced several investors to help him raise a total of $8,000 to get the first issue of Playboy started. At first, he thought about naming the magazine Stag Party, but decided against it, since there was already a magazine called Stag. Hugh Hefner was able to buy Marilyn Monroe's nude photos from a calendar company who owned the rights. These photographs were famous, but since this was decades before people could easily share photos on the internet, very few people had actually seen them. For just $200, he bought the rights to the pictures and published them in the very first issue of Playboy. Since Marilyn Monroe was one of the biggest celebrities of the time, he couldn't have picked a better woman to place on the cover. Magazines were flying off the shelves, and they sold 50,000 copies. The money they made from that issue was just enough to make the second, and after a few months, they were turning a profit. Soon enough, they were selling over 1 million copies a month, and Playboy was essentially an overnight success. Now, it sounds like a joke when people say they read Playboy for the articles, but there's actually a lot of truth to that statement. Hugh Hefner was always against censorship in the media, and he ran one of the very few publications where writers could express themselves without holding back. Some of the greatest authors in the world actually got their start writing for Playboy. Ian Fleming was one of them, and he went on to write James Bond, and Ray Bradbury serialized chapters of Fahrenheit 451 in the magazine before publishing the complete novel. Even Margaret Atwood published several short stories in Playboy before writing her feminist dystopian novel, The Handmaid's Tale. In the 1950s, Hugh Hefner was defying all rational convention and actually promoted feminism and women's sexual liberation, as well as racial equality. In 1959, a series called Playboy's Penthouse aired on the television. For the first time, women were shown on TV as more than just housewives who were staying home to make dinner and take care of the children. The premise of the show was that the viewer followed around Hugh Hefner as he had a classy party in his penthouse apartment. Women wore elegant dresses and men wore suits as they drank cocktails and had interesting conversations while they listened to live jazz music. It was sophisticated, and that lifestyle became an aspiration for many men and women who watched the series. Now, at this point, Hugh Hefner's marriage, it was crumbling, and he and his wife Mildred had agreed to allow one another to sleep with different people. They officially called it quits in 1959 and got a divorce, which left him free to live the bachelor lifestyle to match the Playboy brand. That same year, he bought his first mansion and opened the Playboy Club in Chicago. Soon enough, he would open dozens of clubs all over the country so that men could experience the Playboy's penthouse lifestyle firsthand. By the time he turned 35, the Playboy empire had expanded to a lifestyle brand worth $20 million. As time went on, the magazine would come to be published in over 180 countries, and it became one of the top 20 brands in the entire world. Right-wing conservatives, they were against Playboy from the very first issue because they considered the magazine to be sinful trash. He also got a lot of criticism from the left as well because feminists saw that it was objectifying and over-sexualizing women rather than liberating them. After receiving so much criticism, Hugh Hefner published a book called The Playboy Philosophy in 1962, where he explains his ideas about sex in modern culture and attempts to explain his thought process behind running the business. In 1963, a journalist named Gloria Steinem went undercover for Show magazine to work as a waitress in one of the Playboy clubs. She found out that these girls were being underpaid and they were charged fees whenever they committed even the smallest infractions, like not smiling enough. They were also being treated very badly by the customers, and in the end, women hardly made any money in order to be sexually objectified. Clients were given special keys that allowed them to have total access to the Playboy bunnies, which made the club a glorified brothel. Steinem wrote about her experiences, and she was seen as a hero for feminism by exposing what was going on behind closed doors. Now, Hugh Hefner, he took this criticism seriously and responded by making sure that the women working in his clubs, they were being treated fairly and being paid a proper wage. But as they say, even bad press is good press, and despite all of the controversy, the Playboy brand continued to thrive. Today, it's difficult to imagine Playboy without the mansion filled with beautiful girls, but Hugh Hefner did not buy the iconic house in Los Angeles until 1974. The mansion sits on 5 acres and comes with a movie room, a massive wine cellar, a gym, tennis courts, and even a zoo with exotic animals. Hugh Hefner began hosting some of the biggest parties in history at the Playboy Mansion, with celebrity guests visiting on a regular basis. He was still the most popular guy around, even well into his old age. In the year 1980, he personally paid for the repair of the iconic Hollywood sign, and the city of Los Angeles gave him a star on the Celebrity Walk of Fame as a thank you gift. In the 1980s, Playboy began to struggle as a brand after it became a publicly shared corporation. They were competing with the likes of Penthouse Magazine, so their peak in popularity was over. Hugh Hefner handed control of the company over to his daughter, Christy, who became the new CEO. Hefner tried to give normal domestic life another chance, and he got married to his second wife, Kimberly Conrad, in 1989. She gave birth to 2 sons, Marston and Cooper, and they got to have a fantasy childhood growing up in the Playboy Mansion. Their relationship didn't last, though, and they separated in 1988 and became officially divorced in 2010. After the separation, Hugh Hefner began to invite his girlfriends to live in the house with him, and he even experimented with bisexuality. He had a polyamorous lifestyle where he had multiple girlfriends at one time, but always had a number one girl by his side. He later admitted that he'd slept with roughly 11 out of the 12 monthly Playboy cover models. In 1999, one of Hugh Hefner's ex-girlfriends, Carrie Lee, said that living in the Playboy Mansion was almost like a cult because it was so easy to get caught up in the lifestyle and the drama with the multiple girlfriends. She got so caught up in the Playboy lifestyle that she forgot what was considered normal in the outside world. However, unlike a real cult, the girls living in the house were free to come and go as they pleased. They still had their own personal relationships and kept in touch with their families. Some of them even went to college classes full or part-time, and their work with Playboy helped them pay for their tuition. In 2005, the reality TV series Girls Next Door premiered, and it gave people a look into the lives of the people living and working in the Playboy Mansion. It revealed Hugh Hefner's new lifestyle, with a team of employees to take care of all of his needs. The girls he lived with were also given an allowance to buy whatever they wanted. Of course, though, living in the mansion came with the understanding that Hugh Hefner only wanted to be involved in an open relationship where he could sleep with whoever he wanted, but the girls were not allowed to have another boyfriend. Even though this may seem like a dream scenario for some men, the arrangement was not always a walk in the park for Hefner. Some of the women who once lived with him sued him for palimony after their breakup, which is like alimony for people who are living together but who are not married. During an interview, one of Hefner's ex-girlfriends, Holly Madison, explained that women were competing with one another for the privilege of being in Hugh Hefner's inner circle. Dozens of small-town girls would see their careers skyrocket after modeling in Playboy, and they were desperate to become a part of it. Almost every girl who was involved with the brand moved on to either having a big modeling career or marrying a millionaire. For some, having sex with Hugh Hefner was a very small price to pay for guaranteed fame and fortune. As he got older, Hugh Hefner knew better than to expect any of these young women to be his true love. He said during an interview with the New York Times that having 7 girlfriends was actually a much easier lifestyle to manage than having just one wife. In 2012, he was 86 years old, and he decided that it was finally time to settle down. He married Crystal Harris, who was just 26. On the reality TV show Girls Next Door, Hugh's girlfriends showed off their happy lifestyles living in the Playboy Mansion. But Holly Madison came out with a tell-all book in 2015 saying that she'd actually been manipulated into staying with Hugh Hefner for so many years. She said that she was truly in love with him at first, but when she finally got the exclusive relationship that she was looking for, she was no longer in love with him. She eventually married a millionaire event organizer called Pascal Rotella. Hugh Hefner responded to Madison's accusations in her book, saying it was an attempt to rewrite history for the sake of staying relevant in the media and making money on a book deal. In 2016, it was clear that Hugh Hefner's health was declining, so he decided to sell his mansion in Los Angeles for $100 million to a man named Darren Metropolis. In 2018, Metropolis convinced the city of Los Angeles to add protections to the house so that it can never be torn down. The Playboy Mansion has essentially been turned into a historical landmark. Hugh Hefner died peacefully in September of 2017, surrounded by his friends and family when he was 91 years old. Even though he never got to meet Marilyn Monroe, he still credited her nudes for all of his success. This is why he purchased the burial plot right next to hers. Love him or hate him, Hugh Hefner is still an icon that will be remembered forever. Before he passed away, he said this about his career: I've never been in it for the money. Playboy isn't a business for me. It has been, from the very beginning, a labor of love. And that's pretty easy to say, because if you don't love all of this, you're a fool. So I really hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, please do give us a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. We have a few videos released every week, so hit that subscribe button, hit that bell, and you will find out about all of those. Give us a like if you enjoyed it, and as always, thank you for watching.